circle of reason. You know, at a certain point, books emerge out of a kind of ferment in your own mind, you know, and you can't really account for it. I really don't think one can account for it, and I've given up trying to account for it. So.
The guy back there was talking about what do you think are the issues, what's going to bind these disparate communities together? Is it going to be race or is it going to be religion? And then he was asking sort of a parallel with Sharia law and the internal.
Yes. So two answers to that. The first is, let's think about this, as I've said, from this other point of view. What binds the Anglo-American diaspora? What is it? Is it language? Is it race? Is it culture? Is it a shared history? What exactly is it? And if we try to answer that question, and the question can, I think, be more clearly answered in that instance, we begin to see how difficult it is actually to answer those questions. You know, what is it? I don't know. It becomes harder and harder to sort of to even think about it. For the other question about different civil laws, I think any society that goes down that road is courting disaster. I really do. I mean, if you look at, say, the one place where in Africa, the one country which has managed to create a sort of national community as opposed to local community or particular communities, it's Tanzania, and it was Mwalimu Nyerere, who insisted on creating a common public law to which everyone could appeal. Because even if you actually look at the sort of bases of these laws, often they were laws put in place by colonial administrators with the idea of actually keeping communities separate.
Okay, there's somebody up there who's got the microphone now? Yeah. Okay.
Hi. I really enjoyed your book, In an Antique Land, and the way in which you recovered the character of Bomber. And I was thinking about the way in which he was able to achieve a certain status in the community that he found himself in. Do you think that host communities need to give migrants or immigrants a stake and positions of responsibility and empowerment in order to ease the way in which migration is experienced for both host and settling communities?
That's an interesting question again, because see, I think one of the things which has been so very painful about the South Asian migration into Britain in the 60s onwards is that it was a migration which was restricted at that point largely to a certain class, and the children who came out of this class felt that a certain class identity was also being thrust upon them. Now, if you look at, say, the Boma, you talked about the 12th century and so on. If you think of Egypt, under the Mamluks, I'm talking about the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. Look at the ways in which they incorporated people. These were societies which were incredibly multicultural, really. They had Circassians, they had Nubians, and they brought them in as slaves. But the slaves, through slavery, could aspire to become king. In fact, the slaves did. All the kings, Mamluk means slaves. So they did all become part of a ruling class, if you like. I think if within a society people feel that after having migrated into it, that they're being thrust into a subordinate position, that becomes psychologically very damaging and very difficult for them to adapt to. But again, how much of that is actually thrust upon them and how much of that is a perception that is internal to themselves is, I think, never easy to determine.
Okay, lady there, and then guy over there.
Hello, Kate Telcher. In your talk today, you talked about the history of the word Balti, and your interest in the history of words is apparent throughout your work. I was wondering, is it in sort of tracing etymologies that we can recover the history of contacts between peoples? One of the most striking aspects of your recent novel is, of course, its wonderfully exuberant mixture of languages. And is is it because of cultural contact through language that you continually kind of delight in it?
Well, like most South Asians, I grew up without any definite sense of a boundary between languages. So to me, it's my normal state of existence that, I don't even really know where the boundaries between languages lie. But I'll tell you where, for me, in English, it became very interesting. My supervisor was a student of F.R. Leavis, and he once said to me that, the rule for italicizing words when you're writing in English is that if it's in the Oxford English Dictionary, you can't italicize it. And, I tried following that rule, and if you actually follow that rule, there's almost no common Hindustani word which is not in the Oxford English Dictionary. Really. I mean, I sometimes look at, people who are writing today, often South Asians, and I see that they've italicized a word like masjid. I think that's been in the English language since the 18th century. What are you talking about? Why should you... and especially if you look at 19th century English, it is so profoundly impacted by Asian influences. By Chinese influences, by Hindustani influences, by Arabic influences. I think what actually happened in England, just to trace the way that the language developed, I mean, even though England didn't have, like France, any kind of academy, the great dictionary projects did have some sort of cleansing effect, so that, by the 1920s and 30s, you actually have Orwell writing essays saying that he wants really to celebrate only the Anglo-Saxon roots of the language, and that all the Latinate roots are unwelcome, really. And if he thinks that about the Latinate roots, can you imagine what he thinks of the Hindustani roots, And in fact, I mean, the ways in which Hindustani leached into English is not just through Laskari or through colonials being in England, but also through the gypsies. Deco comes into Cockney through gypsy usages. So I feel that actually what happened is that the high noon of racial thinking was really late 19th century to about mid 20th century, and it's in this period that throughout the English-speaking world there was a sense of a cleansing of language. That Asian influences were driven to the boundaries of the language.
We're going to take, and then one more question from somewhere around that, and that'll probably be the last one. If anyone's got a question anywhere in this side, otherwise yours is the last one. And the lady right in the front is this one.
Okay. Khalid Nadeem, South Asia Middle East Forum. What I'd like to know is, what do you think the impact of 7/7 has been on the communities here, especially as a person based in India? And how do you feel the impact of the Mumbai bombings has been on the Indian Muslim community? Can you see any similarities on the impact on both communities? And how do you think India itself has dealt with this issue in terms of the relationship between, Hindus and Muslims generally? Has it tarnished quite a lot, or has the relationship improved?
Well, I can't really speak for 7/7, but well, with India, as everything you can say, you can also say the opposite. Which is almost always the case. But I do feel, that 26/11 was, on the whole, it was really a watershed in India. It was a watershed in many ways, but most of all, it was a watershed in that it was one major crisis-causing event which didn't result in riots, which didn't result in any kind of mass uprising, any mass violence. And in that sense, it was something very new. And I'm